Bridie of the Grand Canyon, the voice inside the snowman. The two-story ranch house was as deserted as a schoolhouse on Saturday morning. Men and cattle were gone, far away to House Rock Valley. Except for an old wooden cupboard, the place stood empty. There were no bunks, no table, no chairs, just the old cupboard against the wall and a gaping fireplace with a bed of white ashes. Irons, his rifle leading, walked through the emptiness and up the ladder steps to the second floor. Here, too, was a chill air of desertion. The only movement was the snow swirling against the window. He backed down in a hurry to find the burro pushing his nose against a heavy door at one end of the room. It hung on double hinges, and Bridie, with a little foretaste of pleasure, was butting it open. Eagerly, Irons darted around him and struck a match to see what the room held. "Jerusalem!" he gasped, squinting at the pinkness. One whole wall was piled high with pink salt in 100-pound chunks. Already Bridie's tongue was at work on the nearest one. The opposite wall was stacked with logs, and up against them were a roll of wire and a hatchet whose blade winked in the matchlight. Irons started for the hatchet, but the flame sputtered and burned his fingers. With an oath, he picked up logs and hatchet in the dark and groped his way out, letting the door swing against Bridie's rump. Carefully, he laid his rifle on the deer horns fastened to the cupboard. Then he went to work, hacking chips from the logs. "Utah, Utah," his lips kept saying with each stroke. He smiled at how neatly everything was working out. "I got plenty of grub," he was thinking. "A warm place to bunk, and then Utah by noon, probably. Yeah," he said aloud. "Better to stay here tonight and crash a new town by day." While the logs were taking fire, he brought out Bridie's pack and next explored the cupboard. There were 3 odd-shaped sacks in it, one containing a few potatoes beginning to sprout, one apple sprinkled and dried, and the third some kind of herbs or seeds. There were tin cups, too, and plates. Together, his supplies made quite a little pile, and he decided on a hearty meal. He'd have tomato soup to start with, and then fried squirrel and potatoes, and for dessert, coffee and apples, sugared. As he drooled in anticipation, he could hear Bridie peeling strips of bark in the salt house. "Eat hearty, Broomtail," he laughed, pulling out his knife and skinning the squirrel. He chopped the carcass into 4 pieces and dropped them in a skillet of sizzling fat. Meanwhile, he heated the tomato soup and gulped it down. Then he sat rocking on his heels, watching the bubbles of fat boil up over the meat. He swallowed often, hardly able to control the juices that flooded his mouth. Outside, in the black night, the snow masses struck down at the ranch house, enfolding it in a thick blanket. Irons ate until there was only the back of the squirrel left. He stuffed it in the empty soup can and placed it near the fire. It would make a good snack later on. At last he spread the blankets on the floor and rolled himself up, feet to the fire. When he was snoring and it had become steady, Bridie came nosing into the room for food. He found a mound of potato and apple parings and ate them slowly. With a curl of apple peel still dangling from his mouth, he went back to his salt house to munch it. Then he too fell into a deep sleep. Gradually the fire burned low and a cold crept into the house. Irons reached for a log and added it to the fire. For a long time he lay staring at the flames licking around it. Sleep was just beginning to claim him again when suddenly the outside door flew open and a cold blast of snow struck him in the face. A shrouded figure broke through the mist. It was made of snow, humped and padded with snow, and its feet were chunks of ice. Jake Irons lay rigid as if strapped in his blankets. Was this some ghost out of his dreams? Some crazy shadow of the night? The figure couldn't be real. It was cloud stuff, whipped up by the snow, a snowman with coals for eyes. The heat of the fire would melt it and leave only a puddle of water with 2 dead coals swimming in it. But the voice inside the snowman cried out, "Uncle Jim!" And again, "Uncle Jim, you hear?" "Get out!" Irons yelled. "Ain't no Uncle Jim here." The sunken coals shone unafraid, and the snow-mittened hands that drew a hunting knife were unafraid. "I'd as lief die fightin' as starvin'," a boy's high-pitched voice cried out. Irons saw the blade of the knife threatening. He measured the distance to his rifle and the nearness of the knife. He got up, his lips curling in a make-believe welcome. "Come into my parlor," he said with grand gesture. At the same instant, the swinging door opened and a pair of long ears and curious eyes peered around at the newcomer. "Bridie, it's me, Homer Hobbs." The boy's voice caught in his throat. "Remember, you used to pack water for me." He ran stumbling toward the burrow and fell with his arms around Bridie's neck. Irons kicked at a log in disgust. "The sobbin' fool," he spat out the words. "Let 'em hole up together. Tomorrow I'll rid of both of 'em."